Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. Kieran, I don't know about you, but the beautiful game was freezing yesterday. I'm still thawing out. It's one of those things you're thinking, why do we sit outside this pub? Why can't we sit inside like everybody else?
Because that's what you always do, Kevin. You've always told me, the same mates, the same bollocks, the same drinks, the same seats. It has to be done, and it's part of culture. Yeah, and if it involves freezing to death, then so be it.
Yeah, we hoist ourselves by our own petard yesterday. It's like we just had our noses pressed against the window again. Look at all those warm people inside. How was Leicester? It was a good point, wasn't it, for you boys?
It was, yeah. It was some cracking goals, good atmosphere. Met some Leicester fans in the pub beforehand, and they were on fine form as well. So, good day out. And it's probably the first season in many where an away trip has been a good day out without a guaranteed ruining of it by 90 minutes of football. So, loving every moment at present until it ceases to last. And, we acknowledge that these things won't last forever.
We do. It's questions day, Kieran. The first question will come from me. But before that, we have a very, very big news story coming out of Italy, don't we?
Yes. This is to do with the old lady, Juventus. Juventus have been inspected by effectively a financial regulator, and there were two broad issues, and one was a story that we have covered on quite a few occasions, which was to do with transfers of players, and especially the one between Juventus and Barcelona, where they swapped Pjanic and Arthur, both of whom were okay players, with I think the respective transfer fees were 70 million and 62 million euro, and everybody said, "Blimey, O'Reilly, they look a bit steep." And by a pure coincidence, of course, by the unusual way in which football transfers are accounted for, you take all of the profits immediately and you spread the cost over a longer period of time through our very good friend amortization. So it gave a big boost for financial fair play purposes in that particular year. But that was the one which was most noticeable. But the Italian inspector went and looked at 62 transfers involving Italian clubs, and it wasn't just Juventus. Involved the likes of Sampdoria, Genoa, and Pisa, and many others. But 42 of them involved Juventus. And said, well, I'm not particularly happy about these. And it effectively went to court. And the judge said, well, here's the problem. How much is a footballer worth?
Yeah.
And you cannot say with any degree of certainty that they are worth X or Y, because it's a bit like a work of art. It's a unique issue, the registration of a footballer. So the judge rode back on that, but there were further issues, and this is partly due to the fact that Juventus is a public listed company, so its shares are traded on the stock exchange, and therefore it is held to a higher degree of scrutiny and standards than a private company, because you are effectively, as a public company, you are saying, please come and buy or sell our shares at will in an openly traded market. You have to have a series of checks and balances to protect people who want to do that. And the other issues were with regards to wages at Juventus. Juventus said when COVID hit, we've got players to take big pay cuts, big pay deferrals, and so on. And of course, the signal this sends out to investors is, the club is cutting back on its costs, reducing losses, and so on. And I think it could be said that the accusation is that Juventus were a bit fast and loose with how they described these payments, and the accusation is that the players were being paid through other means, and the club wasn't being completely transparent. And as a result of that, Juventus have been given a 15 points deduction, although the club is appealing. The club saying we did nothing wrong. And Fabio Paratici, who was, I think, effectively the director of football, he's been given a 30-month ban from Italian football. And the Italian authorities, the effectively Italian equivalent of the FA, are saying, we think that should be a worldwide ban. And that's an issue here as far as English football is concerned, because he's effectively the sporting director at a club called Spurs. He's in charge of recruiting managers and players. I think some Spurs fans might be quite happy if that ban was upheld, especially my neighbour Paul, who I think is not impressed with his performance to date. Also banned was our very good friend, the saviour of football, as he describes himself, Andrea Agnelli, one of the architects of Super League, the godfather of Alex Severin, who is effectively the president of UEFA, who, if people may recall, going back to Super League, suddenly turned his phone off to all calls from Mr. Severin, and is described by his goddaughter, who, because he is Alex Severin's daughter's godfather, described as a snake. And I think that's very harsh, because I like snakes. I don't know. I've met quite a few snakes in in petting zoos. Taking my kids along when they were small. I always got on fine with them, and I wouldn't want them to be associated with such a sleazy individual as Andrea Agnelli. So that's where we are. It's going to make it difficult for Juventus to qualify for the Champions League. Boo, and indeed who. People will remember that they've been previously stripped of titles and kicked out of Serie A into Serie B historically for historic financial irregularities, and leopards, spots, etc. come to mind.
I know the north of England, Kieran, where you lived for a long time, is traditionally considered to be harder than the south of England. But what sort of petting zoo has got snakes in it for kids to stroke and touch, for the love of God? 15-point penalty, Kieran. This is not just them mistaking a few accountants, dropping a few noughts, is it, by mistake? I mean, that's clearly they've considered that Juventus have seriously breached the rules. And weren't Juve one of the clubs you talked about recently refusing to open their accounts?
I'm not. They were certainly being awkward,
right?
With regards to cooperation with various things. But the inspectors, I think, have a right, and perhaps if Italy had an independent regulator of football. They could change the culture of the game, and they could protect the game from unscrupulous owners such as Andrea Agnelli.
Indeed. Now, it's questions day, Kieran. As I said, that first question, and I'm not being self-indulgent here because it is a big financial story, but I'm asking this about the state of affairs at Crystal Palace. And the reason I'm asking is because I stopped counting after about 30 yesterday, people braving the cold to come outside and asked me if I knew what was happening. I mean, I don't think you can shed any light on the relationship between Harris, Blitzer, Textor and Parrish, who are essentially the four owners of the club. But was publicly this week, John Textor's been talking about, off the back of his takeover at Olympique Lyonnais, he's now set up a new scheme, SPA says, what people are calling a blank cheque scheme. So a lot of Palace fans are rather concerned about what his financial plans for Lyon may affect future financial plans at Palace, in particular transfers, etc.
Right. So to just give a little bit of background here, John Textor is an American investor. I believe he owns 40% of Crystal Palace. Is that correct?
His company Eagle Holdings owns 40%, and he owns as some percent of Eagle Holdings, yes. Yes.
What he's also doing is he is setting up this thing called a SPAC. SPAC stands for Special Purpose Acquisitive Company. As you rightly said, it's also known as a blank check vehicle. And the way that it operates is as follows. You effectively create this investment fund, and you say to people, come and buy shares in us, give us a load of money, and we are going to spend that money on something. And you go, we like to narrow that down a wee bit. What does that something actually involve? And then they say, well, we're going to buy some companies in some industries, but we're not going to tell you what those companies are. So John Textor's SPAC vehicle is going to be in the entertainment / sports space / sector. So effectively what they're trying to do here is to persuade people who are quite wealthy to put money. And the reason why I call it a blank check is that you've got no idea how the money's going to be spent. And it is, I wouldn't say it's a leap of faith, but it does involve a degree of confidence in the people behind the company. And these were very popular in the world of investment in 2021. They raised billions and billions of dollars. In 2022, a bit of the lustre, a bit of the shine began to disappear from them because people were saying, we don't appear, we are putting an awful lot of confidence here in these individuals. But, global economic circumstances have changed in 2022. But John Textor does seem to be very confident with regards to this. So what could that money be used to buy? It could be used to try to buy out the other partners at Crystal Palace. Right. That would be one thing. It could be used to buy football clubs or other sports institutions elsewhere in Europe or the USA. They could buy an MLS franchise, or they could buy a non-football franchise. We are seeing some of the multi-club owners thinking, well, let's have an IPL franchise as well as a football franchise, because then we've got different demographics, different geographical markets, and so on. So the potential good for I think you and your fellow Palace fans would be, well, this money, if John Textor's viewpoint is that Crystal Palace would be more valuable, because ultimately you'll make your money from buying and selling individual companies. So that he's not in it for the next, in all probability, the next 20 to 30 years at Crystal Palace. You're looking to improve a business, sell it on at a profit. Those profits go back into the fund. Those profits are then paid out to the investors of the SPAC. So one of the ways of doing that is, potentially to make Palace more competitive in the Premier League. So if that is the case, then it could be beneficial as far as the transfer spend is concerned. Another way to do it is, profit ultimately is income less costs. It's to cut costs. So will there be a greater emphasis on cost cutting? And whilst we have a whinge about our football clubs at times, we also know that in the main they're a little bit cuddly, they're a little bit fluffy, and and some people are there is an awful lot of good done at individual football clubs. The private equity SPACs, none of that. No, you are only employed for a particular purpose. If the benefits of your employment don't exceed the costs, then you're gone. So it can be quite ruthless. So that could be the downside. So I think that's where we stand. It's not something to be scared of, in my view. It's not something to say, well, this is a disaster. Equally, it's not a pathway to riches. It's not anyway going to be the equivalent of what we've seen at Newcastle United with PIF, what we've seen at Manchester City with Sheikh Mansour and so on, where the return on the investment is not valued in monetary terms. It's valued in terms of increased profile, increased exposure, and so on. So I think that's where we stand. Financial investors expect a financial return. So how are they going to get that return? They're going to get the return from profit. Where's that profit going to come to? Well, does it mean they're going to put? If Palace proceed with the expansions of the stadium, are all of the seats going to be more expensive? Are they all going to be geared towards hospitality packages and so on? And where do the regular fans stand in all this? They stand at the end of the queue.
No matter how much they pay for their seats, they stand anyway. Kieran, you know what football fans are like, and Palace fans in particular. Not one of them yesterday sidled up to me and discussed what the potential good might be. All they wanted to know was the potential harm. That's how football fans' minds works. Our first question from an actual person other than us comes from Chris Pollard. Excuse me. And Chris says, I support Sheffield United, but I'm a member of Sheffield FC, the world's first ever football club, which cost me £2.50 a month. They're currently waiting to build a new ground, brackets, not stadium, exclamation mark, exclamation mark. How many £2.50s and other investments is it taking to build this ground? I'd hate for it to be a burden on the club and harm it in any way, as this is a club that needs protection probably a little more than most due to its history. Here.
Absolutely. Yes, I believe that Sheffield FC presently play at a place called Dronfield. I think it had a bit of a nomadic existence, and they're sort of outside of the official boundaries of Sheffield at present, which is a real shame because something like this, given the importance of football in terms of culture and history in this country, it's absolutely essential. It should be preserved. They're still getting attendances of around about 350, and the proposals are to move to a place called Meadowhead, which is within the boundaries. The capacity of the ground will be 4,000, and the estimated cost is in the region of 20 million. Now, 20 million. Yeah, I think there will be. It's going to be a bit more multifunction in the sense that there will be cricket facilities and other sporting facilities there as well.
That's a lot of that's a lot of £2.50s, isn't it?
That is a lot of £2.50s. Yes, that if you were to pay in your £2.50s for a full year, it would require 666,667 people to contribute.
Wow!
And presently there's 5,000 members, and fair play to them, because they're from all over the world. They're people do. So I think we will be therefore looking at perhaps some private benefactors, perhaps some central funding as well. Perhaps the Levelling Up Fund, for example, would be a good example of the use there, because it will be for the benefit of the community as well as the football club Sheffield FC. So I was a bit surprised at that cost, but the more I read into it, it does appear that there's going to be quite a lot involved with it, not just a football space, as it were.
This is an interesting one, Kieran, because it's one of those questions where I don't know why I've not thought of it before. And as you know, they're the questions I like the most. And I assume that I know the answer, but I'm going to be interested to find out. And the question comes from Alan Hemphill. And Alan says, if a player's contract has a relegation clause that states their wages will decrease by a percentage on relegation, then if that club immediately gets promoted back, is the original wage of the player automatically reinstated? So I'm thinking there must be several players, Alan says, from Bournemouth, Fulham and Norwich, who may be in that category, who got relegated with the club, had their wages cut, got promoted straight back. Do the wages automatically reinstate?
Yes, I contacted one of our friends in the agency industry for a bit of advice on this, and he said, what now tends to happen is that there will be embedded into the contract a salary associated not just with relegation to the Championship, but what he refers to as the Sunderland effect.
Oh, okay.
A further reduction should the club go straight through the back end of the Championship and end up in League One. And people, he says, clubs are now getting wise, and players and their representatives are accepting a degree of pay cut. Now, and I was having this discussion with some people in the past couple of days with regards to parachute payments. In order for clubs relegated from the Premier League to break even in the Championship, you'd have to have pay cuts in the region of 80%. And agents, players, also if you're a Premier League player and you bought a house and you've got a mortgage, I'd struggle to find anybody that could take an 80% pay cut, with a sort of a regular job who could then meet their financial obligations. So there are pay cuts embedded. I was talking again to a chief executive, and he says, "Yeah, we can probably get them to agree to perhaps 20 to 25% in the Championship, and yes, we probably managed to get a wee bit more in League One as well. But there are automatic step ups because the contracts are on a divisional basis, should the club be promoted back to the Premier League. And in addition to that, there would be bonuses embedded in the contract for promotion, which is understandable. And if you take a look at what we see in most contracts, in most club accounts, those bonuses normally amount sort of collectively to somewhere between 10 to 15 million pounds. So we are talking substantial amounts of money. But I think owing to, I think Jack Rodwell was quite famous or infamous in the Sunderland Till I Die documentary as being a player who was on a Premier League salary in League One. And when they interviewed the player, he says, "I'm not here to cause trouble, but what do you expect me to do?" People walking up to me in the street and saying, "You should walk away from your contract. You should get transferred." And I said, "Well, my first responsibility is my family. If the club were daft enough to sign the contract in the first place, then nobody forced them to. Why should I be forced to walk away?" And I think it is it's an interesting issue. We know which clubs are never going to be relegated, so this is not going to be an issue. But for the other 14, then it is something which is taken into consideration. But it is difficult to persuade agents and players to agree to huge pay cuts, and they simply won't sign the contract. They'll either stay where they are, or they'll look for another club.
Yeah. Our next question, Kieran, comes from Quentin Soldan. And we know that Quentin, Kieran, has been a loyal listener right from the start. I didn't know how old he was, but I think I can guess from the tone of his first line in this question that he's probably our sort of age, because the first line of his question is, when a player pulls a hamstring, when a player pulls a hamstring, twists an ankle or chips a nail, we hear that player has been sent for a scan. So I don't think anybody under the age of 35 would talk about players chipping a nail, Kieran, would they? And then Quentin says, "I know this isn't a medical podcast." And then, Quentin, you've listened to it long enough to know that doesn't stop us talking about all sorts of things we're not qualified for, not even pub qualifications. But what kind of scan is most frequently used? MRI, CT, etc. And regardless of what kind of scan, what kind of cost is incurred, and who pays for the cost?
Right. Well, here again, I'm indebted to one of our friends at a football club, chief executive of a club, who put me in the direction of the Premier League Medical Care Scheme Limited, and I think this is used by quite a few clubs, and this organisation provides what is known as stop loss insurance.
Oh.
Which I'd never heard of before. So this Google is my friend, as always. And this is where effectively the club approaches the insurance company and says, what we're concerned about is if one of our players has to have a long series of procedures, or perhaps 3 or 4 of our players, you get catastrophe happening, with lots of players with lots of injuries. And the club wants some form of protection. So what happens here is the club says, we will pay the first £10,000 a year, or depending on the size of the club, the first £100,000 a year of medical fees in respect of our players. And anything above that, this is where your stop loss. It's to stop it's to give the club an effective knowledge at the start of the season. Worst case scenario, if we get a lot of injuries, we won't have to pay more than £100,000 in medical fees, and the insurance company then steps in at above £100,000 and says, right, we will pay for the excess. So the club would go to, if the player twangs a hamstring, Wilfried Zaha, he twanged his yesterday. Was that right? I was watching the game.
He did, and I don't think anything proves, Kieran, that we are not a medical podcast more than the fact that we use the word twang. I'd be disappointed if Wilf turned up at his specialist appointment on Monday for the doctor to say, "Oh, you've definitely twanged that, haven't you?" No. But yes, Wilf did twang his hamstring yesterday, unfortunately.
And anybody that's ever had a hamstring twang will know that it is one of the most horrible sensations. It happened to me once when I was playing cricket for Trafford, and halfway through my run up, it twanged, and I went down like a horse had been shot. And of course, you get zero sympathy because the rest of my team just fell about laughing. It's me screaming in agony. And you've got the Prowler and Size 5 and Skunk and Biffer and all the others sort of just... This is what happens. This is Northern cricket. I
think that's universal. I mean, we know across, there's not one part of the world where a man doesn't think that the funniest thing that can happen is another man getting hit in the testicles by a ball.
Yes.
Size 5, Skunk, Biffer, the Prowler. This is very unlike any cricket team I've ever seen on Midsummer Murders, Kieran. Anyway, carry on. I believe we left it at Wilf twanging his hamstring.
Right, so Wilf will twang his hamstring, and what will happen is an MRI, again, based on my friend Good Google, is probably going to cost, from Bupa or PPP. You go along to the local provider, and it's probably going to cost £300 to £400. Then you're going to have to go and pay for the consultant to review it and to advise, and then of course, depending upon the nature of the scan and the procedure, if any, that is required, the costs start to mount up quite quickly. So the club wants protection, and at the end of each season, is my understanding, is the premiums are, you say if you want cover for anything over £10,000, this is going to be the premium. Over £100,000, this is the premium. So clubs decide the level of risk that they want to take. They want to effectively self-insure, and the excess is paid from the insurance company, and the premiums change on a year by year basis because they have to, because of what we find is that medical costs and medical procedures are advancing ahead even of the very high rates of inflation that we presently have sort of economically.
Our next question comes from Amardeep Singh. And Amardeep says, I have a rule of boycotting kits that have a gambling sponsor. My team Wolves changed their shirt sponsor this season from gambling company Manbear X to AstroPay. Now, I've never heard of AstroPay and can't find out much about them online. Are they wrong-uns, or can I lift my boycott?
I've got good news and bad news for you here, I think, Amardeep. The good news is that AstroPay are a monetary transfer service. So people might have heard of the likes of Skrill and Revolut and so on. And effectively what happens here is you put money into a wallet. So you transfer money out of your bank account into what they refer to as a wallet run by one of these organizations. And this is really useful if you are trying to transfer money overseas, because I've moaned in the past about I help out my mum who lives in Ireland, and my high street bank, who will not name, but they're Spanish. They charge me £25 a time every time I want to go and send a few quid to my mum. I go, what exactly are you doing for your 25 quid? Whereas if you use one of these services, they charge you nothing. They might make a little bit of money, I guess, on especially if it's an overseas transfer, in terms of, first of all, they don't pay you any interest for the money in your wallet, and B, if you are transferring it overseas, they're probably making a margin on the exchange rate, just as everybody else does. So AstroPay appear to be one of these money transfer services. So I thought, okay, let's now try and find out. Amardeep said here, are they wrong-uns? So I went on to an organisation called Trustpilot, which looks at reviews. And of the 66 money transfer services that they review, AstroPay came 66th, with an average review points of 1.6 stars out of 5. It's not for me to confirm these, because this, for all I know, it could be it could be a group of people trying to take. It could be rivals trying to put bad reviews. When Michael McIntyre and Swiss Ramble do start up their football business podcast, I expect they'll be encouraging their fans to diss us on social media and so on. So I cannot say whether it's good or bad, but certainly reading the reviews, that they were not positive at all in terms of customer service, feedback, disputes, and so on. But I cannot confirm the accuracy of the very large number of people who are saying that AstroPay are a bit bobbins.
Roddy McDonald says he has the misfortune, I don't put yourself down, Roddy, the misfortune to be a fan of Partick Thistle in Glasgow. 60 years of torture, he says. And I was wondering, how far down the English Football League do you go before you find a club with similar funding to the Jags? Now, we have talked about the situation at Partick Thistle just a month or so ago, Kieran, haven't we, with somebody from their trust or a fan group. So we're kind of aware of what's going on, what has been going on. But can you shed any more light on Roddy McDonald's sad plea?
Yes, I mean, in terms of funding, and there's been quite a bit of change since the Jags Trust came onto the show. Partick Thistle are in many respects could be described as a fan-owned or fan-controlled club these days, which is good. In terms of the EFL equivalent, what have we got? Well, we would have been able to say Portsmouth, but they were then they were controlled by the Fans Trust, but they then sold out to Michael Eisner of Disney fame. So I would say that the closest equivalents would be AFC Wimbledon and Newport County. Both AFC Wimbledon and Newport County certainly are owned by the Supporters Trust, and people often say to me, surely a fan-owned club is intuitively better than an individual-owned club or an entity-owned club. And I think we have to give us a slightly more nuanced answer, because I was talking to some Preston fans over the course of the last few days, because Preston announced £20 million worth of losses for 2022. And they're in the Championship, and talking to Radio Preston or Radio Lancashire and some of the local journalists, and they were saying, how do we go forwards? The fans, not all the fans, no, the vast majority of fans, understand where we are. Could any other model work? If you are a fan-owned football club, where are the fans going to find £20 million between them in a year? To cover that. And remember, that's just for one season. And admittedly, those are the biggest losses ever undertaken by the club. So I think there is a natural ceiling for clubs who are fan-owned. And that natural ceiling, in my view, would be League Two and League One, because the losses there tends to be in the regions of hundreds of thousands of pounds, as opposed to millions, if not tens of millions. And that's not to say that if you're losing 400 grand in League One or League Two, that the fans can find that money easily. But they tend to have budgets which are more geared towards break even, because they don't have that benefactor that can write out a check for 5, 10, 15 grand a week or whatever it's going to be. So that's where we are as far as the EFL are concerned. If you then drop into the National League, there are far more clubs that are fan influenced / fan owned. But it's not easy. We've spoken on quite a few occasions about the sort of the travails at Rochdale, and Rochdale isn't a fan-owned club, but it doesn't have a majority shareholder, and therefore it's difficult for a club such as Rochdale to raise significant sums. Overall, it's due to a lack of cost control within the industry as a whole, because the aim of a football club at the start of the season, as far as us fans are concerned, is to spend money to get promoted or to achieve progress, and that means that from a financial point of view, you are going to be at risk.
My instinct is, Kieran, and this is just an instinct because obviously I haven't backed it up with anything basic like research, but it does seem that in Scotland there are clubs at a slightly higher level than down here who are fan-owned. I mean, Hearts is a big club, isn't it, which is essentially fan-owned, and Partick Thistle in Scotland, with all due respect to Newport and AFC Wimbledon, are probably a bigger club in Scotland than those two clubs are in English football, aren't they?
Yes, I think we've got Motherwell as well.
That's what you're yeah.
So yes, I think that partly is a function of Scottish football does not have the same cliff edges that we have, and this comes back to the much broader issue of the distribution of money. I know it's now the 22nd. I've still got my fingers crossed. We might have the white paper out by the end of this month, and if then we'll try to get somebody involved in its creation to give us a longer explanation.
Yeah.
So the incentives to overspend don't exist in Scottish football, and also the ability to win the biggest prizes is less, because Scottish football, and I'm going to upset some people by saying it, isn't that competitive in terms of the trophy winning, because Rangers and Celtic are going to win. They're certainly going to win the Premier League or the Premiership each year, and there's a good chance they're going to win at least one of the cups. I think to be fair, St Johnstone have been successful. They did win a couple of years ago, which was a fantastic achievement. So therefore, if your ability to win cups and trophies is diminished, the incentive to overspend in terms of the additional money you get from being at the top of the Championship compared to the bottom of the Premiership is not there. The incentive to live beyond your means isn't there as well, and therefore the culture of gambling with the club's future, which we see here in England, especially in the EFL Championship. And I'm not criticising owners for doing this, because you talk to fans. In fact, fans are quite happy for the future of the club to be gambled with, provided it's with somebody else's money, and that there'll always be somebody else's money. And of course, that isn't always the case.
Luke Smith asks our next question, Kieran, and I like Luke Smith for reasons that will become apparent very, very soon. Luke says, I would like to caveat this question with the preface that I am a couple of pints of cider in, and while I'm sure the answer to it is fairly obvious to the initiated and uninebriated, I confess I am at the moment neither. I have to say, Luke, you for somebody who's a couple of ciders in, you ask the question very lucidly, although I suspect it might have taken about an hour with his mate helping him. If a player, it's a good question as well, though, if a player has a sell-on clause from a transfer from Club A to Club B, what happens if Club A is subsequently sold and another company is formed to take them over? Does Club B owe the new company for Club A the money, or does the obligation disappear with new owners?
What would happen here is that if there is a club ownership change, under the terms of the transfer, you will acquire all of the assets and all of the liabilities, unless the club's in administration, in which case you only acquire all of the assets. And what you will do is, if let's say that we are buying a football club, you and I, what price are we going to pay? And we would look, if they thought that we were legit, which clearly is quite a big caveat, they would give us access to what the solicitors and accountants like to call the data room, but what we would call would be the books, and that would list out these are the contracts, this is what we owe on leases, this is our rental agreement, and in terms of players that are sold, these are any instalments outstanding, and these are the add-ons. And what we would do is we would say, well, you sold player X, they've got they've got a £2 million add-on if their side reaches the Champions League. We think there's a 20% chance of that happening. So we'd say, well, we're willing to pay 20% times 2 million. We'd add another 400 grand onto the price we're prepared to pay for the club. So all of the contracts would be transferred to the new owner. They would not be eliminated upon takeover, but they would form part of the negotiations between the two parties in terms of the seller and the buyer of the club. But the club that has bought the player is completely out of this. They would, because what we would do is we would set up Price of Football Investments Limited, which we then use to buy. Let's say we use it to buy Crystal Palace and Crystal Palace Football Club Limited, and so on. And it would be Crystal Palace Football Club Limited that would have the contract with, let's just say, Everton for a sell-on clause, and that would go from Everton to Crystal Palace FC Limited, and then ultimately through to Price of Football Investments.
Our pre-penultimate question. I was about to say penultimate, as I didn't realise there was another question underneath the last question. It comes from Aaron Dodsworth. Aaron says, in America, they have an at-will employment system. How can any player be forced to honour their contracts these days, especially in the free agent era we seem to be approaching? Case in point being Ricardo Pepsi moving to FC Augsburg for 20 million plus add-ons. Why wouldn't he just walk away from his contract at will and take, say, a 10 million signing on fee instead?
Right, this is an intriguing one, and I think this is where FIFA and American labour law come into a bit of conflict. For people unfamiliar with this concept of an at-will contract, US labour laws, I think it's fair to say, are tilted quite significantly towards the employer rather than the employee. And an employer can dismiss any employee at will for good cause, bad cause, or no cause at all, according to a court ruling, provided the reason for the dismissal is not illegal. So if you dismissed an individual due to race, due to religion, due to sexuality, due to gender, and so on, that would tend to be not allowed. And in some individual states in the United States, those illegal reasons are stronger than others. So it does certainly benefit the employer. And Donald Trump, when he was president, he suggested to the NFL owners that they terminate the contract of NFL players who were taking the knee at will, and there have been some potential legal cases, but it never actually crystallised. In terms of the player, does that mean that the player can walk away from the sporting club, including clearly football clubs, at will? Well, yes, they could, but the football club would still retain the player's registration. And now, under FIFA rules, and this is a series of rules which are adhered to universally. Only one club can hold the registration of a football player at one time, which prevents the player. The player could sign a contract of employment with another football club, but they would not be allowed to be registered with the US soccer authorities or those of another country unless FIFA are given their blessing. And normally, in order to give your blessing, you have to give a compensation fee, which is what we refer to as a transfer fee. So at present, Aaron, it wouldn't work. There could be test cases in individual countries in due course. Yeah, we go back to what happened with the Bosman case, and there have been similar discussions with regards to this. And we're also going through at present a lot of talk about how Chelsea are signing players on 8-year contracts, because people are pointing out to me, if you go to FIFA's own constitution, and I was there this morning, according to FIFA, you cannot have a player sign for more than 5 years. But again, if you look at the small print in relation to this, it says unless local laws allow you to sign a contract for more, and this is how Chelsea are able to so seemingly contradict what FIFA say, but actually under UK labour laws, and those are the most countries you find. This is a classic example of FIFA being a little bit clever, perhaps. I'm not aware of many countries which limit the length of a contract for an employee.
Kieran, what were you doing visiting the FIFA Constitution on a Sunday morning? Is it any wonder you get the eyebrows from the Baroness every now and again?
Yes, especially as we've got some, I'd say no more than shelf-related issues taking place domestically. When she listens to this, or when she sort of wanders past, yes, the eyebrows are heading in a northerly direction.
Oh, I don't like the sound of shelf-related issues. That might explain why we heard Finley head for the hills very early on in the pod this morning. Yes. Our penultimate question, Kieran, you know how much I love a name. And my God, the penultimate question comes from, this is one of my favourite names so far in 3 years of podcasting. It comes from Tony Hereford. I believe my mum had both his albums back in the day. But if Tony Hereford wasn't a mate of Matt Monro, I want to know the reason why. And clearly, Tony's question put music into my head subconsciously, because Tony Hereford wants to. I can imagine, Tony, you might have to send me a photograph, because I've got an image in my head of how you look, and it involves a shirt collar above the jacket. just let me know. Tony's question is, how much do clubs pay in royalties for the music they play pre-match and half-time? Now, we did, bizarrely, this is one of the very first questions we ever got back in the day, but I'm very happy to revisit it, partly because I've forgotten the answer.
This is I've done quite a bit of looking into this. In respect of music royalties, if music is played in a public place, then the Performing Rights Society is able to claim copyright with regards to that. And there are specific sub-clauses and individual rules for different locations which are playing music. So I went into the area which deals with sporting activity, and it says in respect of general music. So if you've got the stadium announcer and they're playing a couple of tunes warming up, the royalty is 0.50 pence per person attending. So half a pence. So if you've got 10,000 people, then it's 10,000 times half pence and so on. But if you have specific, and this might be of use to you, might be interesting to you as a Palace fan, if you've got specific entry and exit music which is associated with the club, that 0.505 pence goes up to 1.142 pence per person attending. So if we take Crystal Palace's match yesterday with Newcastle, you come out to Glad All Over. Mm-hmm. There were 25,350 people in attendance, which means that there was a royalty required of £289 to the songwriter. So over the course of a season, that would be work out around about £6,000 to £7,000. So not to be sneezed at. And then we've also got what they refer to as integral music, which is music which is specifically played to celebrate an event. So if you score a goal, some people, and this is where I think Damon Albarn must be rubbing his hands together with glee, because everybody, of course, goes and plays Song 2. Yeah. I'm going to see Blur later this year, and I'm really looking forward to it, by the way. For that, you get even more money. You get 1.778 pence per person attending. So again, that could, so if that was at Palace's match yesterday, Damon Albarn would be picking up around about £400 for every goal that Palace scored.
That's George Sefton, who's the legendary PA announcer at Liverpool, Anfield. He makes a point of breaking new Liverpool bands approach him, and he plays their records before, during, and after the game, which I think is a very laudable thing to do. And the Performing Rights Society, Kieran, of course, Fergal Sharkey
Yes.
used to be the head. I'm not sure if he is now. I believe he might be campaigning full time for cleaner water.
Yes, yeah, it does, for which he does a magnificent job.
He does a fantastic job. But then the PRS headquarters was in Streatham. It's on Streatham High Road. So every now and again, if I had nothing to do, I thought, I'm going to go and walk up Streatham High Road and see if I can see Fergal Sharkey. And every time I did, I saw him in a sandwich shop once. That's Fergal Sharkey buying a sandwich in Streatham. Fantastic.
He has been known to name check you in song as well.
Oh, Jesus, I love that band, but that song hung around my neck for 3 years.
I can imagine.
It really did. Especially because I was none of those things. Our last question, Kieran, is a kind of sort of metaphysical one, almost really, from Andrew Lee. And Andrew Lee says this is a question for both of you. What is it like for passionate football fans like yourselves to look behind the curtain of professional football? Does it spoil your enjoyment of watching the game, knowing what you know about the finances? Or are you able to switch off and still be a normal fan? If I can answer for myself first, Kieran, as we've established, I have the attention span of a toddler. So for the most part, you will tell me something terrifying about football. And I've forgotten it by the time I get into the Parsons Arms. If anything, I wouldn't. It's a really interesting question, Andrew, and a lot of people have wanted to discuss this with both of us. I think for me, in a way, it almost enhances it having more knowledge of how the game works. Also, it's added to our instinctive belief before doing the pod that most football fans are really good, decent people, as are the vast majority of people in the game itself. But it's the second part of Andrew's question is the important part. It's like yesterday I could be really worried about the state of football. I could be thinking, oh my God, 15 points for Juventus. I wonder what happens if imagine if Palace had accidentally forgotten to sign a doc. But as soon as you get in the pub, as soon as you see the red and blue scarves, as soon as you start talking that same nonsense to the same people, that all disappears. And it's just the football. We had two Malaysian visitors yesterday in the Parsons Arms School, and one of my oldest, dearest friends went to play football abroad a long time ago, and he has two stepsons from Malaysia, two of the nicest young people you could meet in their mid-20s. They came to England this week, their first visit to the UK, to London. They've been saving up for years because they're going to see Arsenal play Man United this afternoon. And Dominic, my friend, went, if you're going to see Arsenal, you've got to go and see some authentic, old-fashioned, working-class football. And these boys came to the Parsons. It took them 5 minutes to adjust. It just so happened yesterday that the Parsons was on full-on South London geezer character mode. So he met a lot of interesting people who wanted to ask him a lot of questions. One of them in particular, by the end of it, had a Cockney accent and was drinking more Guinness than was good for him. And then we walked them to Sellers Park, and just I told them this is very different. Tomorrow at Arsenal, you'll have a really comfortable experience. It's a brilliant stadium, but it was freezing cold, and we walked them up to Sellers Park. And when they saw the Homesdale for the first time, they've been watching Premier League football since they were babies. Their excitement was just wonderful to see, and it's like that's what's important. No matter what we discuss on this pod, Kieran, a lot of which is good, nothing will ever take away from me the actual joy of just being a fan. And I think all fans are like, we all worry. Most of us worry even Man City fans will be worrying now that they might not win the Premier League. There's always we're always in a low level state of angst. But once you get there, once you're in the pub, once you're with your mates, once you're in the ground, that all goes. That all goes, and that's why we love the game, I think, so much, Kieran. From the age of 5, when you first go and you're worried about whether your new teacher likes you or not, you go to Palace and that disappears. You get sacked from work, like you get dumped by people. You go to Palace, you forget it. I don't think any amount of bad news we talk about, Kieran, from my point of view, will ever ever take away that passion, that joy.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. I mean, this sounds like a glib saying. Yeah, what has happened over the course of the past few years, and working with you, but also getting to know people in the industry. The glib part of me says, love the game, hate the industry.
Yeah,
good point. But that's actually being harsh, because I think football sort of encapsulates society in many regards, that it brings out the very best and the very worst in people. And we've got to know some people are those parts of football that are criticised. Yeah, we've got to know football agents, we've got to know football administrators and chief executives, and listening to what they say through their lens. Yeah, not every agent, in fact, the vast majority of agents are trying to do the best for their clients. The vast majority of chief executives are trying to do what's best for everybody, including fans, although their perception of what's good for fans might not always agree with ours. We've got to know owners of clubs. We've got Simon at Plymouth, Andy at Accrington, Mark Palios, Jason, and so on. And when you hear them talk, it does give you a degree of reassurance, because the people who I don't have a lot of time for, the likes of Agnelli and the Glazers and so on, who for them football is an ego activity or a means of making more money. They are actually in the minority. So I'd say Monday to Friday, I can, and I'm irritatingly cheerful at the best of times, but even football can drag me down. And I do work. I'm not bigging myself up. I do work ridiculous hours, sort of going into all of this, because it has become a bit of an obsession. But come Saturday, all of that is forgotten. And yes, like you, I get people approaching me in the pub and asking questions about this, that, and the other. And it was the same with Leicester yesterday. And it is good that fans see themselves as guardians of the club. And I think that we as fans, and I don't think I've ever been prouder to be a football fan, during lockdown. We do hold these people to account, and if what we do can in any way help individual fans, fan groups, or even ourselves, hold truth to power or speak truth to power, then I think we're doing more good. But I can assure you, for 90 minutes yesterday, the word amortization didn't go through my head when Mitoma put it in from 25 yards.
If people listening to this want to know how irritatingly cheerful Kieran actually is, I think he's the only person I know who sings along to Sussex by the Sea with a smile on his face. Well, most normal people, if they're in the best mood of their lives, as soon as you start singing that, you go. I'll tell you what's reassuring, Kieran, and I hope people at home will find this reassuring as well, is that, of course, I've through a lot of the broadcasting stuff I've done, I've met football fans from every club, but I didn't often get to meet people who worked at the club. And maybe the press office, that would be the level of people that I've met. But I've been surprised doing this pod and meeting some quite important senior people in football through it, that they're all football fans. I expected a lot of people running football clubs at every level to be businessmen or businesswomen who happen to be working in football rather than cornflakes or cars. But they're not. They're people who love the game. And I would say 90% of the people who work at Palace, for example, in fairly senior positions, are Palace fans. And that's what I've found at every club. Every now and again, somebody will sheepishly admit in a meeting that they're a Chelsea fan. But as long as they're a football fan, it's so unusual to find people working in football that aren't football fans. And I find that very reassuring.
Yeah, now, absolutely.
I'm afraid, Kieran, even this last announcement tested your legendary cheerfulness, because we will get this gig at Plymouth happening. But unfortunately, the show that was due to take place on March the 21st has had to be cancelled. And the reason being, and I think we're going to need to talk to Andy Holt about this, because I think he's done it deliberately, because he doesn't want us going anywhere else to do the live show, is that Plymouth's League One fixture with Accrington Stanley has been rescheduled for that evening. We did suggest that perhaps we would be the halftime entertainment. Plymouth thought maybe maybe better not. We are so sorry that we've had to move this live show again. This is the third time, I think. It was originally meant to be happening in September and then December. We're looking at a date in the summer. We thought that would be safer. We've accepted Plymouth's suggestion that it's probably best to do it when the football season is not happening. We'll let you know when we've agreed that with the club. Hopefully you can join us there if you have bought a ticket already. And again, if you can't make the new date, you will get a full refund. Of course you will. We'll keep you updated. And again, we can't apologise enough, but I understand that an actual football game takes preference to us. So thank you to everybody who has a ticket and will still come. And thank you to those people who maybe are now able to come because it's the summer and they're not working. Who knows? Thank you as well to everyone who's donated to the pod via our Patreon page. If you'd like to join them and make a small monthly contribution, that'd be very kind. You can do so by going to patreon.com/priceoffootball. If you have a question you'd like answered on the show, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. And in the meantime, I shall hand you over to Mr. Kieran Maguire for his customary farewell.
Well, thank you for all the questions, all the support on Patreon, and all the interaction in both in real life and online and so on. There's various ways you can support the show. And one of those ways is to give us a review. Apparently, it helps us with algorithms and credibility and charts and all of the things which producer guy he sends us emails and we look at them and then we phone each other up and say, "Do you understand this?" And we go, "No," but we've perfected nodding, which is very useful.
It's very difficult to do via email, but we managed to do it.
It is, yes. So it apparently it doesn't matter what you say on the review. So you could even say you would rather have the show presented by Adamant, famous pop singer of the 1980s, famous for his trousers, and Charlie Methven, former owner of Sunderland Football Club, also famous for his trousers. Now, I've got an apology to Charlie.
Have you?
Charlie sent an email to questions@priceoffootball.com, which was actually directed at me last June. And he wanted to hold me to account for certain things. We're not boasting it. We have a ridiculous backlog of questions, and it's only now just got to the top of the pile. I don't actually monitor that particular. So I will reply to your email, Charlie, and please don't take it as a slight. I was not ignoring you. I will try to articulate an appropriate response. It was a 10-page email, so that there were quite a few questions in it and observations, and I will try to respond respectively. Thank you.
I see. So this wasn't a question about amortization then?
No.
Okay. I like that. Was he responding to some comments you made about him on the pod?
Yeah. The fact that he didn't send me a Christmas card, I think probably read into that. Yeah, absolutely.
I always like £10. Was it sent around 3 a.m. in the morning?
I'm not sure.
Maybe that will placate him, Kieran. Maybe if you say, I take your point, I will try and stick it where the sun don't shine. But in the meantime, how would you like to co-host the pod with Adamant one week?
Yes.
Who's I met Adamant is a charming man, and responsible for some, I think, still underrated songs, Kieran. He was a...
I first saw them in 1980, and I last saw them about 4 years ago. And they're still hugely underrated. It's just one of those bands that sort of went under the radar because I think that was during NME's probably finest sneering phase. So they hated him, and of course, all of the hipsters at university had to hate him. I thought the songs were great.
I thought that 2-drum sound was brilliant. Anyway, we digress, Kieran. We're on to another pod.
Unusual for us. Yes.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The price of football. The price of football.